Welcome back, folks. Good to have so many of you with us today. I want to share with you some very recent breakthroughs in the science of behavior change and see how we can apply these to have really unprecedented impacts on health and well-being. And we will take a look at it from the perspective of engagement. And we need to be clear that engagement involves behavior change through a series of interventions. We first start with recruitment, reaching out to folks. How can we get them to begin to participate in programs that can enhance health and well-being? Once we do, then we have to be concerned about, will we retain them? Will they continue to be engaged? But our job isn't done then. We need to be showing that they are progressing towards healthier lifestyles and better well-being. And ultimately, we need to have greater success for them and for us. Just to take in and share with you that if we are concerned only with recruitment and retention and don't have adequate success, then we're really not having the kind of impacts that we need to have. Give you an example. Consulted with one of the Blue Cross plans. They were preparing to take and launch a program for their employers. They had tried it out with their own employees. They incentivized them with $300 to $1,800 in cash equivalents. They were very pleased that they had 50% of their employees repeating an HRA and biometrics over a 12-month period. I then asked, however, what do you expect your success rate to be? And they said, well, there is evidence that repeating those measures will produce behavior change. I said the problem is that the change is so small that it has no real practical implications. So we'll take and first look at what we know in terms of science of recruiting and retaining, but then we ultimately want to have employees and populations so engaged that we maximize their success. Now, part of the challenge is that most employees are not intending to participate in health promotion programs. Looking at that from a stage perspective, what we know is the vast majority of folks who are not currently participating are in the pre-contemplation or contemplation stages. Typically, less than 10% are prepared to participate. So that makes a major challenge for us. How do we help them to be able to progress from one stage to the next? And what we look at is the relationship between the pros and cons of changing by the stages of change for 48 different behaviors, including engagement behaviors, both starting and retaining. And what we see is folks in pre-contemplation have the cons of participating over the pros. We know the pros have to go up for them to participate and to remain engaged. And then from contemplation, we need to lower the cons as well. What's the number one con for people not practicing regular exercise in the U.S.? And you'll quickly guess time. That's the number one, not only in the U.S., but in Taiwan and Mexico. And time is the number one reason for retired Americans not participating in exercise programs. What's the number one con for people not participating in wellness programs? And again, it is time. So we'll be looking both at incentives and increasing the pros, but we also need to be looking at decreasing the cons and the disincentives like time. When we use incentives, like financial incentives and other types, we need to recognize that we're relying on more external controls. And ultimately, if we're going to have lasting impacts on our participants, we need to be able to transform those social controls into self-controls. Let me give you an example. Military wants to go smoke-free. With the Air Force, during basic training, it is required that there be no smoking whatsoever for the full 6 weeks. Randomized blood draws, if there's any cocaine in your blood, what's the consequence? Very serious consequence, you have to repeat basic training. No smoking for 6 weeks. That's great. But what happens at 12 months? What's the recidivism rate after those social controls are removed? And what we know is that at about 12 months, the recidivism rate is high, but I don't think you'd be guessing nearly as high as it is. It was about 127%. That means about 27% more enlisted people were smoking than joined the Air Force. And we concluded the Air Force was a major risk factor for the enlisted people's health. But now we take that social control, we take and work with folks in pre-contemplation who are intending to go back to smoking as soon as basic training is over. We give them one session in terms of increasing those pros, like they'll be more likely to be promoted, like they would save 1 month of their salary by not smoking. And what do we see with those folks who are intending to go back to smoking immediately? At 12 months, we see those who received that brief intervention, and this was 7,000 enlisted people, we see they were 5 times as likely to not be smoking. So we can take, and there's a lot of concern that when we rely on external controls, extrinsic motivation, can we take and transform that into intrinsic motivation? Now, with our programs, we know we need to increase the pros to engage people, to keep them engaged. One of the ways in terms of breakthroughs we're able to do that is we can now simultaneously intervene on 3 behaviors or 4 behaviors and be just as successful as when we intervene on just a single behavior. So we can have much greater impact on people's health. The problem is we also need to decrease the cons. And in our early work, we were having to treat each behavior separately. We were having to give a full program for exercise and diet and smoking, for example. And what does that do? That actually raises the cons in terms of the amount of time. And it provides disincentives for people staying with us. So then we look for another breakthrough. Could we produce synergy? So here's a question. If people take action on one behavior like smoking, are they more or less likely to take action on a second behavior like diet? And here's what we find. We call this co-action. That in the control group, those who took action on a single behavior like smoking were 15% less likely to take action on a second behavior like diet. But compare that to our treatment groups who received our best practices of tailored communications, either through coaching or online. There we see about 3.5 times more likely to take action. So now we have the potential to take and produce more benefits, more changes with less time, less demand on the participants. And so I want to show with you in terms of our most recent breakthrough. This is a randomized clinical trial where we were looking to take an impact not only on reducing multiple health risk behaviors, but on increasing multiple domains of well-being. And we had 3 programs that we were looking at. One was online, where we had stress as the primary behavior, and we spent most time on helping folks to manage their stress more effectively. Then we had exercise as a secondary behavior where we only had to spend 1 or 2 minutes over the 3 sessions on exercise. Another treatment was our coaches. These were actually Healthways coaches. This was funded by Healthways, so this was real-world coaching. They had exercise as the primary behavior, and they used tailored communications, but only on the constructs that drive most behavior change, like stage, like pros and cons, like self-efficacy or confidence. And then they had stress management as a secondary behavior where they would spend a couple of minutes to help folks move on that as well. And then we had a control condition. There are almost 4,000 people participating from 39 states. Only about half are currently employed, about a quarter retired, a quarter unemployed, relatively low income, and the history not good. Over 50% had been smokers or were smokers, and about 80% had a history with depression. We take a look in terms of their current weight status. We see that about 45% were obese, 30% overweight, worse than the national average, as bad as it is. So this is clearly a challenging group. We take a look at how ready were they to take action on their exercise and their stress. and we see that the solid majority were not ready. They would historically be called unmotivated. We take and look at, sorry, I want to go back here. Okay. We take and look at how much change were we able to produce. Our goal was to change an average of one behavior per person. Remember with HRAs and with biometrics, it was a fraction, less than a tenth of one behavior on average from those kinds of programs. We surpassed our goal, and it was about 220% greater than the control group. We had things like this. With that coaching group, with exercise as a primary behavior, we had 58% go from at risk with exercise to not at risk. We had 75% go from not managing stress effectively to managing stress effectively. And then particularly encouraging was that we had 30% go from unhealthy diet to healthy diet, even though we didn't treat that whatsoever. That's one of the signs of real engagement, where people are changing behaviors on their own without us targeting it, without us treating it. Now let's look at well-being, which we did not treat directly, but see the impacts there. On overall well-being, we see our group in the exercise leading the way. Stress management online, clearly outperforming the controls as well. To give you an idea of the magnitude of change here, the worst overall well-being in the U.S., as you could guess, was at the worst of our economic crisis in 2008. Just like the market crashed, well-being in the U.S. crashed. And the increase in well-being over the next 12 months of the initial recovery, the increase was about half of the increase in overall well-being that we saw with our coaches with stress as the primary behavior. We see improvement, and I'm going to focus on emotional health. Emotional health here, this is not just decrease in stress, decrease in anxiety, decrease in depression, but this is also increase in positive emotions, increase in happiness, increase in joy, increase in enjoyment. And that's one of the things in terms of increasing the benefits to folks. Folks don't want to just have their risk go down, their disease go down, but they also want the positive part of their lives to go up. And we see similar kind of increases in physical health and the biggest increases on healthy behaviors, because that's what we were treating directly. Now, let's take and look at life evaluation. This is 2 questions on a scale of 0 from 1 to 10, with 1 being the worst possible life to 10 being the best possible life. How do I rate my life currently? And then, same scale, how do I expect my life to be 5 years from now? And with those 2 items, we can reliably and validly take and categorize people into 3 categories. One is suffering, next is struggling, the third is thriving. What we see here at the beginning of this trial, we see that there were more people who were struggling, clearly, than who were thriving. You rarely see that in the U.S., except in our worst of times. Basically, you see that profile in failed states. So this is a group that was clearly struggling and suffering and not thriving nearly as much. And what happened with our interventions, where we had changed exercise and stress and diet, and I didn't mention we also had significant impact on depression. Look at the kind of changes that we have in terms of increasing in thriving. That's the blue bar there. And what we see is with our best treatment of coaching, tailored coaching for exercise and stress, we see a 70% increase in the percentage of those who were thriving. And in our online stress program with exercise as a secondary one, we see about a 50% increase in the percentage who are thriving. When we take and look at the relationship of these variables to things like lost productivity, we are able to show that those who go from struggling to thriving have a very significant and financially important decrease in lost productivity. Those who go from thriving to struggling, they have increase in lost productivity. Those who are managing their stress more effectively, greater increases in positive productivity. So, what have we seen in this brief period of time? If we take and apply some of the innovations in the science of behavior change, if we take and increase the pros for participating, and one of the things that I didn't mention is, while folks are not prepared, employees, for example, are not prepared to participate in health promotion programs, they are prepared to trade time for money. And the question is, how much time are they prepared to trade for money? Here's an example. Another fellow I talked with in Santa Fe after a presentation there, head of HR for a company of 22,000. They are paying people $1,000 a year to participate in their well-being programs. They were pleased that they were getting 35% participation. I shared with them that in other companies that we have worked with, for 1/3 of that, we are actually at times getting more than 90% participation. But why is the difference? They have greater incentives than what I would be talking about on some of the cases that we've worked on, but they also have greater disincentives. Here's an example. They would only pay employees for participating in programs like groups or clinics for weight management. I said that's a major disincentive. The consumer marketing shows very clearly that of Americans who are overweight or obese, less than 5% want to participate in clinic programs or group programs. Over 50% want to participate in home-based programs. So again, those disincentives can take and counter incentives that were greater than in some of the other conditions that we have seen. But then as we can start to take and communicate to people that not only are we in a position to reduce the time that we need to ask of them to participate, but we can dramatically decrease their risk for health problems and for well-being problems, and we can dramatically increase their well-being, including positive things like increase in happiness, increase in joy, and increase in thriving. Again, I think we need to be at a point where we are prepared to take and disseminate these kinds of innovations and breakthroughs, and I look forward to your questions. First question. Feel like I have heard about the stages of change thing for a while now. What's new in it? Well, frankly, one of the things that we are just talking about is that the stage model has really led the way in being able to simultaneously change multiple behaviors. Things like the co-action, where if you take action on one behavior, are you more or less likely to take action on a second behavior? And we show 3.5 times more likely. Frankly, we have not seen any intervention that has shown any reports on co-action. And we are showing that we are impacting multiple domains. What's really new is the application to new areas, new problem areas, new challenges like engagement and increasingly like enhancing well-being. Second question, do co-actions have to be related? That's a good question. For example, if they're energy balance questions, are they more likely to change together, like exercise and diet? And we have not yet seen that they have to be related that way. We've seen addictive behavior like smoking change with an energy balance behavior like diet. We clearly have seen an affective behavior like stress change with a energy balance behavior like exercise. But we will continue to look at that question, certainly a very important one. Third question, how many coaching sessions did these participants complete in the RCT on stress and on exercise? And here, again, in terms of time, we limited that to 3 interactions over a 6-month period, and 3 interactions online as well as with the telephonic coaching. Should I take another question? Okay, how long was a typical health coaching session? That's the 4th question. Typically it was, again, what the common practice would be. We were not looking at more intensive interventions. They were about 20 minutes in terms of time. And I think the thing that we have been misled at times is that we need more intensity, that will do it. If we look at the diabetes prevention programs where they had like 12 sessions, hour sessions with a dietitian to prevent 58% of diabetes. Then in Finland, they went down to 6 sessions and looked at the amount of increase in exercise and change in diet, change in weight. Frankly, we have shown with 4 sessions using computer-tailored interventions that compared to the second Finnish study where there was over 50% prevention of type 2 diabetes, that we had as much change or more on exercise, on diet, and on weight. I think the thing is, one of the things that we are getting to is to say, what is the active ingredient within our treatments that will drive the most behavior change? And how can we take and use our time so it is most time effective for us and for the participants? And the 5th question, was this pilot nationwide? As I indicated, we did have people participating from 39 different states, and so it did have good representation there. But we selected that you had to be at risk both for not managing stress effectively and for being at risk with exercise, and that led to a group that was more distressed, had lower well-being, had other kinds of clear indications of more problems than we would see in a representative sample of nationwide. But it's also the kind of population that employers and governments would be spending the most time on because we know they're at the greatest risk for chronic disease, for disability, for increased health care costs, and for lost productivity. Okay, we're going to wrap it up. Great being with you today, and I will take and turn this over to my good friend Marat.